Chapter 194. She was shocked. She turned around and looked at the man who was murmuring in his sleep. Shin-er. Shin-er. Endless sarcasm spread from the bottom of her heart. Shin Yueji shook off his hand. The man's pale sleeping face seemed to be in endless pain. Her hand was grabbed by the man again. The man was very strong, and his grip on her was very tight. It was a kind of imprisonment, as though she would suddenly disappear. Shin-er, he murmured over and over again, calling her softly. Shin Yueji's stiff body was pressed under his body. The familiar smell of the man filled her nose. This was the gentleness that she was familiar with and didn't hate. It was still the same endless lingering and deep love as in the past. His gentle lips brushed her neck and kissed her neck almost out of control. That familiar sweet smell make the man forget to go back, constantly smelling all the smell that belongs to her body. He was greedy beyond measure. Shin Yueji could feel that he was out of control. His hands were wantonly on her body. This was the Feng Joching that she had never seen before. It was so out of control that it was strange. She used all her strength to push the man away. The man was deep in his sleep, and his pale face was filled with endless pain. Shin Yueji tidied up her messy clothes and got off the bed in a bit of a mess. Shin-er. The man seemed to be in more pain when his arms were empty. He reached out to grab her. Shin Yueji gave her hand to him. The man grabbed her hand and seemed to feel at ease. The pain on his face also dissipated a lot. Shin Yueji tucked the quilt for him thoughtfully. When the man completely calmed down, she stepped out. She stepped out of the inner hall. Well, this is the trusted maid of the imperial concubine's sister. How can you discipline her? Still not admitting your mistake. Suddenly there was a dispute in the hall. She frowned immediately. She tidied up her messy clothes and prepared to go out. Hearing this familiar voice that was like the chirping of an oriole, the knot in Shin Yueji's heart dissipated. She immediately smiled and even put down her hand that was tidying up her messy clothes. Instead, she revealed a large area of snow-white skin on her neck. The dense and ambiguous marks on it were instantly eye-catching. She hurriedly picked up the broken tea set that was scattered all over the ground. Empress, forgive me. It was Newbie who was blind and bumped into Empress. This time, it was indeed her negligence. She didn't expect Jiyu Yuyin to suddenly visit, causing her to bump into her when she rushed out. When she made a mistake, he would admit it, so his attitude was especially good. But in Shin Yueji's eyes, it was obvious that double happiness had been bullied. Especially her delicate face, there was a clear palm print. She walked out slowly and asked, "What's going on?" "Yo, Sister Empress." As if she had just seen Jiyu Yuyin, she hurriedly bowed and said, "Greetings, Sister Empress." Jiyu Yuyin smiled slightly and was about to help her up, but inadvertently saw the dense kiss marks on her snow-white neck. Although the collar that was deliberately pulled open could not be hidden from her eyes, the kiss marks on her neck, and her messy hair, the redness on her face, the smile on Jiyu Yuin's face instantly froze. Chapter 195. Jiyu Yuin's hands were clenched so tightly that they bled. Her eyes were filled with intense jealousy. She had been with the emperor for so long, but the best he had done to her was to hug her. He had never kissed her. What method did Shin Yueji use? To be able to make the emperor like this, the densely packed kiss marks were still lingering in her mind, and it was difficult for them to dissipate. She knew. The emperor had lost control. The faint smell of blood and the prickling sensation brought Jiyu Yuyin back to her senses. She smiled faintly. Looks like what I said before was right. With imperial consort's beauty, it's only a matter of time before you gain favor in the harem. Shin Yueji pursed her lips shyly. What is Empress Jejie saying? Once the wound on Jejie's face heals, there will be no younger sister left. Out of the corner of his eye, he glanced at Shuangshi's swollen face. Her fair fingers caressed her crimson lips. I wonder how Big Sis Empress face is doing. Oh, that's right. Why did Big Sister Empress suddenly come here today? This concubine didn't even have time to freshen up. I've made a fool of myself in front of elder sister Empress. Jiyu Yuyin chuckled lightly. Thank you for your concern, Sister Guifei. This consort's wound has healed very quickly, and it's all thanks to Sister Guifei's snow jade lotus. This consort's face has already regrown, and I believe it won't be long before the wound on my face is completely healed. Speaking of this, Jiyu Yuyin took a step forward and held her hand. During the days that Bengong was injured, Shen Guifei had taken care of Bengong a lot. Taking advantage of the fact that Bengong's face injuries are getting better today, Bengong specially came over personally to thank younger sister Guifei. That's good. Shen Yueji let out a long breath and pulled her hand out of Mo Tienga's palm without a trace. She smiled embarrassedly and said, Sister Empress is too serious. Sister is injured, how could I not care? This is what I should do. Sister Empress is treating me like an outsider. Double happiness, why are you still standing there? Hurry up and invite Empress Sister in to pour tea for Her Majesty. Yes, Your Highness. Shuangshi covered the obvious palm on his face. When he passed by Shen Yueji, his long and narrow eyes narrowed. Wait. Your Highness. Shuangshi stopped in front of her. After hearing her words, he stood there in confusion. Shen Yueji held her chin. What's wrong with your face? Don't tell me you accidentally bumped into something when you went out. Oh, it's like this. Just as Double Happiness was about to speak, Jiyu Yuyin smiled apologetically. Nanny Jiyu. This servant is here. I told you to apologize to Miss Double Happiness, so why are you still standing there? Yes, Your Highness. The middle-aged servant girl called Nurse Jiyu obediently walked out from behind her and looked at Shuangshi. Her attitude was neither servile nor overbearing. Miss Shuangshi, this old servant was impatient and hit you. I hope Miss Shuangshi won't take it to heart. Double Happiness did not want to cause trouble for Shen Yueji. After all, the power of the Jiyu family was not to be trifled with. She waved her hand and said, Granny Jiyu. She was too impatient and hit her. Chapter 196. Jiyu Yuerin's apologetic smile became a little sharper. She stared coldly at Nanny Jiyu beside her. Didn't you hear what Imperial Concubine said? Nanny Jiyu didn't dare to hesitate. With a respectful expression, she apologized to Shuangshi again. Miss Shuangshi. I always do things according to the rules, and I'm fair in rewards and punishments. There is nothing between Empress Jejia and Empress Jejia. Logically speaking, today, I should also give face to Empress Jejia. If Shuangshi is beaten, then so be it. I shouldn't alienate Empress Jejia because of two servants. But her crimson lips were pressed into a straight line. This Kie still doesn't know what mistake Shuangshi has made to make Jiyu Memar not care about the benevolence Ben Gong gave to the Empress in the past and directly hit her. Jiyu Yuyin pursed her lips and didn't speak. Nanny Gu's hard face was tight, and her eyes were full of disdain and contempt. Including when she apologized to Shuangshi just now, her arrogance and disdain couldn't escape Shen Yueji's eyes. I'm a person who cares about the feelings of servants. Shuangshi has been with me for so long. Now she was beaten for no reason and swallowed her anger. If she made a mistake and Sister Empress taught her a lesson for me, it's still reasonable. But if she didn't make a mistake and was suddenly beaten. Speaking of this, she looked at Nanny Jiyu in front of her with a disdainful face, twitched her lips, and smiled. Nanny Jiyu, you look unfamiliar. I don't seem to have seen you before. Nanny Jiyu bowed. In reply to Imperial Concubine Shen, I was just sent to the palace by Madam to serve Her Majesty. The Madam in her mouth naturally referred to Murongyun. Shen Yueji's expression didn't change. I see. Shuangshi, tell me, how did you offend Her Majesty just now? Shuangshi knelt on the ground with a sorrowful face. I saw the tea on the table was cold, and I was going to change the pot. I didn't expect Her Majesty to suddenly visit, and I didn't let anyone report. I walked abruptly and almost hit Her Majesty. As he spoke, Shuangshi clenched his fists and purposely made a few small cuts with his sharp nails. When Shen Yueji realized her words, she opened her hand to take a look. Only then did she discover that her pure white palm had long been dyed red with a pool of red blood. The blood continued to flow from the wound, looking ghastly and frightening. It was obvious that the wounds were caused by a broken tea set. Jiyu Yuyin and Granny Gu's expressions changed when they saw this. However, one could imagine that Shen Yueji's expression was not good. Looking at Shuangshi's blood-stained white palms, a trace of heartache flashed across her eyes. In the end, she steeled herself and endured it. She forced a smile. So you accidentally bumped into Empress Sister. Empress Sister's body is so delicate, how could you bump into her? Nanny Jiyu wanted to protect the Empress, so it was reasonable for her to hit you. Bengong didn't expect Shuangshi's hand to be so serious. It was Bengong's negligence. Nanny Jiyu just entered the palace and didn't know the rules of the palace. What's more, she didn't know that Imperial concubine Shun had helped Bengong the day before yesterday. Jiyu Yuyin argued for Granny Jiyu. She saw that Shun Yueji's gaze was not on her at all. She kept saying that it was reasonable, but the heartache for Shuangshi in her eyes was obvious. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Granny Jiyu. I'm here. Chapter 197. Your Highness. Nanny Jiyu looked at her with some confusion, and immediately understood what she meant. She rolled her dark eyes disdainfully a few times, knelt on the ground, and kowtowed to Shun Yueji. Your Highness, all the mistakes are my fault. I didn't understand the rules of the palace. She fiercely swung her hand and gave herself 2 tight slaps. She didn't stop until her 2 faces, which were covered in powder, were bright red. Miss Shuangshi, I was wrong before. These 2 slaps are my apology to you. I hope you can be magnanimous and don't lower yourself to my level. Receiving the hint from Her Highness's eyes, Shuangshi smiled and quickly helped Nanny Jiyu up from the ground. Nanny Jiyu is older than me. It was my carelessness that caused such trouble. My Highness and the Empress are like sisters. We can't make the relationship stiff because of our little things. Nanny Jiyu, in fact, it was my fault first. I don't mean to blame you. Nanny, you don't have to do this. Sister is weak and can't stand for a long time. Come in and sit. Shun Yueji smiled and took the initiative to invite her in. Jiyu Yuyin smiled faintly. If she hadn't let Nanny Jiyu come, Shun Yueji would not have let her enter the main hall of Fengqi Palace as she wished. She entered the hall calmly and walked to the high place to sit. Her status was above Shun Yueji, so she should sit on the top. Shun Yueji didn't say much. She quietly found a seat on the top and sat down. After sitting down gracefully, Jiyu Yuyin waved her hand and said, Nanny Jiyu. Yes, Your Highness. Nanny Jiyu raised her hand and the crisp sound of slapping resounded in the hall. 7 or 8 palace maids and eunuchs outside the hall came in with a few plates of jewelry. The plates were wrapped in red cloth, but there were some pearls and jadeite exposed. They looked delicate and bright. How could they be bad if they came from a place like Xianghe Palace? Shun Yueji looked puzzled. Empress Sister, what is this? Jiyu Yuyin smiled and ordered people to lift the red cloth. Jewelry, jade bracelets, necklaces, earrings, all of them were inlaid with priceless pearls. These are all bestowed by the Emperor to Bengong previously. There are too many types, and when younger Consort Sister was in the residence, she was also deeply loved by old General Shun, and what she lacked the most were these rare treasures. Our auspicious Harmony Palace has a lot of these accessories. I really don't know which ones Imperial Consort Mai likes, so I brought some of these over to give to Imperial Consort Mai. Shun Yueji's small face showed that she was flattered. Empress, you can't do that. Younger sister doesn't have this fortune. These are all bestowed to you by His Majesty himself. If you were to give them to this concubine, I'm afraid that His Majesty will not be happy when he finds out. These are merely worldly possessions and Bengong is indebted to Consort Shun, so how could the Emperor not be happy? Jiyu Yuyin smiled slightly. Imperial Consort should not decline. You've helped Bengong so much and almost suffered grievances at Bengong's hands. These days, Bengong has been feeling apologetic. Take these accessories as Bengong's apology to Imperial Consort. Seeing that she had spoken to this point, Shun Yueji could not decline anymore and nodded her head. Since it's like this concubine will not say anything else. Double happiness. Yes, Your Highness. I heard that Hua Yang is currently working in Imperial Consort's Phoenix Perching Palace. Chapter 198. Shun Yueji nodded. Not only Huayang, but also the palace maids and eunuchs brought out of the secret chamber. After their injuries are healed, I plan to recruit them to Fengqi Palace. Hearing this, the smile on Jiyu Yuan's face had another meaning. Sister Imperial Concubine is kind to them, especially the servants in the harem. Imperial Concubine is kind to them for free. Imperial Concubine can rest assured to use such people. Shin Yueji chuckled. That's right. Speaking of which, these people used to be Empress Sister's servants in auspicious Harmony Palace. I asked His Majesty's opinion, but I didn't get Sister's consent. Since Sister is here today, these servants are nimble and do things quickly. If it weren't for what happened to Tang Cai, I would like to take them back to auspicious Harmony Palace. I'm afraid that even if I want to use them now, they won't be willing to follow me. Shin Yueji laughed. Sister is magnanimous, gentle and kind. It's their blessing to follow Sister. It's not like what you said. Jiyu Yuyan looked at her with a smile. After their injuries are healed, it's good to stay in Fengqi Palace. I hope Imperial Concubine can treat them well. After all, I'm really sorry for this matter. Empress, rest assured. I will be more considerate to them. After the two of them talked for a while, the hall fell into silence again. During the tea, the two had a tacit understanding. Shin Yueji could feel that her gaze seemed to fall on her body. That sharp, needle-like gaze fell on her white neck. On her half-covered snow-white neck, there were dense kiss marks. Just looking at it, people couldn't help but remember the turbulence between her and the Emperor. Squinting at Jiyu Yuan's forbearing appearance, Shin Yueji laughed in her heart. No one would be able to accept seeing the man they loved dote on another woman. Sometimes, she felt that Jiyu Yuan was very pitiful. Did she think too well of Feng Jiuqing, or did she think that in Feng Jiuqing's heart, her position was far higher than the country and power? I heard that before Sister Imperial Concubine entered the palace, you had a relationship with the Prince Regent. Her sudden mention of this made her think of Zhongsun Wuyue, whose tongue was cut off. She was now a little dignified in this harem. Domineering, ruthless. Those who didn't know the truth would think that she was abusing her position to avenge a personal grudge, deliberately destroying Zhongsun Wuyue. Those who knew the truth felt that she had punished Zhongsun Wuyue too severely, destroying her way out. Shin Yueji wiped the water from the corner of her mouth and lightly said, Imperial Concubine Moon ran to His Majesty's imperial study and publicly spread rumors that this concubine had an affair with the regent. She also said that the regent stayed at this concubine's place day and night. When it came to the funny part, Shin Yueji covered her mouth and laughed. A few days ago, the regent wanted to kill me. How could the regent change his opinion of me so quickly in just a few days? Moreover, Sister Empress knows about the relationship between the Prince Regent and the former Empress. He has been depressed recently. I didn't get his favor before I entered the palace, so how could I have an affair with him after he entered the palace? Jiyu Yuyan nodded. Imperial Concubine Moon, because of a personal grudge, spread false rumors and tried to destroy the Imperial Concubine's innocence. She should be severely punished. Otherwise, if the concubines follow suit, it won't be a good sign. Chapter 199. Seeing that Jiyu Yuyan mentioned the Emperor at every turn, Jiyu Yuyan didn't know whether she was deliberately showing off or not. Jiyu Yuan's identity was there, so it was not good to lose her temper. But Nanny Jiyu couldn't bear to see her master always being rejected by Shin Yueji. She smiled coldly and secretly reminded Jiyu Yuyan of her identity. Imperial Concubine has done a favor for my master first. Not only is the Empress grateful to Imperial Concubine, but even the Emperor takes care of Imperial Concubine. But she deliberately prolonged her voice. Imperial Concubine should know that the Emperor doesn't like concubines to make trouble. Most concubines who can be selected to enter the palace are polite, gentle and kind. But Imperial Concubine directly ordered people to cut off Concubine Moon's tongue and set off a rain of blood in the harem. The Emperor turned a blind eye to Imperial Concubine's kindness to the Empress, but Imperial Concubine's action is too inappropriate. This consort's actions are righteous and my actions are straightforward. When I was at the estate, Father taught this consort that if someone dares to act atrociously over your head, then you must bully them back twice as much. Otherwise, others will think that you're easy to bully. This person doesn't learn from his mistakes and will instead become even worse in the future. Shun Yueji rested an arm on the edge of the chair and looked at Jiyu Momo's overbearing face. Momo also knows that Imperial Consort, you didn't just run to the Emperor to complain about this consort. This is related to this consort's innocence. Could it be that Jiyu Momo has forgotten how the late Empress died? A venomous woman who wanted to take my life. The corners of her lips curled up. But I only ordered someone to cut her tongue. Compared to her saying that she cares about my sisterhood, between me and her, who is the one who cares about who? Shun Yueji's words were well-founded and made Nanny Jiyu speechless. Yes, she knew how important a woman's chastity was in the harem. If the emperor listened to Zhongsun Wuyue's words, Shun Yueji would end up like the former empress. But she only cut off Zhongsun Wuyue's tongue in return and had no other means to deal with her. In comparison, Shun Yueji was too kind. Nanny Jiyu wanted to use this as a pretext to remind Shun Yueji of propriety. Compared with the empress, she was nothing. Now that she had been outmaneuvered, her face turned pale and green. She couldn't utter another word for a long time. But Shun Yueji gave a cold laugh, not wanting to let her go like this. Jiyu Memar said that the emperor doesn't like imperial concubines to cause trouble. The imperial concubines that are chosen to enter the palace all know etiquette, distinguish right from wrong, and are gentle and kind. Can I take it that Nanny Jiyu is implying that I'm cruel and merciless? Arrogant because you're favored? Jiyu Yurin's expression abruptly changed as she scolded, Nanny Jiyu. Nanny Jiyu was scared and hurriedly knelt on the ground. Imperial concubine, I didn't mean that, I just. Just what? Shun Yueji sneered at her. If you weren't my empress sister's servant, do you think you could still stand here and say such insolent words to me? Being reprimanded, Nanny Jiyu didn't dare to say a word, for fear that she would make more mistakes. Jiyu Yuyin knew that Shun Yueji had a glib tongue. She had seen this mouth of hers in the past few days. Chapter 200. There was a fire in her heart, but she smiled calmly. Please don't be offended, Imperial concubine Shun. It's the first time that Nanny Jiyu entered the palace. Relying on my identity, she forgot the rules in the harem and lost her sense of propriety. When I go back, I will punish her well and let her remember it. There's a good saying that it's good to know one's mistakes and correct them. I believe that Nanny Jiyu will understand the rules of the harem thoroughly under the guidance of Empress Sister in the future. Shun Yueji took a sip of tea and sneered. She even satirized her master. How could Jiyu Yuyin not understand the meaning of her words? Although Shun Yueji's identity was lower than hers, she had seen the identity given by the emperor and the layout of Fengqi Palace since she came in. Everything was equal to her. If she deliberately made trouble for Shun Yueji, she was afraid that the emperor would be dissatisfied. Her snow-white fingertips trembled slightly. She covered her mouth and coughed lightly. Her gaze fell on her pair of white hands. There were still some imperfections on them, but they were fair and tender flesh could be seen growing. It seems that the injury on Guifei Meimei's hand has almost healed in the past few days. I didn't expect the Yulu ointment to be so useful. I thought it would take a few more days like elder sister. I didn't expect it to recover so quickly. Shun Yueji looked up and down at her jade-like fingers in surprise. This pair of hands was like her charming face. No matter how you looked at it, her whole body exuded charming vitality. Elder sister, the injury was on my hands, but not my face. Elder sister, you must pay more attention in the future. This face is very important to a woman. Jiyu Yuyin chuckled, I know. She stroked her loose phoenix robe. Seeing this, Nanny Jiyu beside her hurriedly came forward to help her up. As Jiyu Yuyin got up, Shun Yueji also stood up. I suddenly feel unwell. Imperial concubine sister, sorry to bother you. Elder sister is weak. It's too much for you to come to the palace to thank me in person. Since elder sister is not feeling well, you should go back quickly. She felt that Jiyu Yurin's eyes always fell on her neck intentionally or unintentionally. And Shun Yueji seemed to unintentionally pull down the collar on her neck so that she could see it clearly. A look of hatred and jealousy flashed across her bright eyes. How could this escape Shun Yueji's eyes? During this period of silence, Jiyu Yuyin spent most of her time looking at her neck. Seeing the dense and intimate marks on it, even if she wanted to endure it, the ferocious expression on her face was a constant reminder of her master's current mood. Jiyu Yuyin also knew that she had lost her composure. She forced herself to withdraw her gaze from Shin Yueji's neck. But after all, she was still young and full of vigor. When she thought about how the man she loved the most was hypocritical and disdainful of touching her, and how he cared so much about Shin Yueji, a woman who had only entered the palace for a month or so, she couldn't help but think. She had worked so hard for so long, but all she got in return was a hug from him. But what she got in return was his everything. How could she not be angry and jealous? A fire was burning in his heart. Jiyu Yuyin closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She was supported by Nanny Jiyu as they left Phoenix Perch Palace. Chapter 201. Shin Yueji's gaze fell on the jade fan in Shuangshi's hands. Shin Yueji would never forget this jade fan. This was a treasure gifted by an envoy from another country. Speaking of the jade fan's similarity, it was undoubtedly warm in winter and cool in summer. In winter, the wind from the jade fan was hot. In summer, the wind from the jade fan was cool. This jade fan was Jiyu Yuin's most precious treasure. Shin Yueji had never thought that she would give it to her. It seemed that she had done her best to express her gratitude. She looked up and down at the jade fan and said meaningfully, "Did she smear something on it?" Shuangshi's face was filled with anger. "Your Highness, this is the most unpresentable medicine in the Jianghu." "Oh!" The wind that flashes out from the jade shaking fan carries a fragrant scent. When a person is tired, they can sleep with this fragrance. However, at the same time, this kind of fragrance can also cover up the other smells on the fan. Hearing this, Shin Yueji brought the jade fan to her nose and sniffed it. There was indeed a lingering fragrance. What medicine in the Jianghu? Dispersing sickness. Shin Yueji frowned. What medicine is this? This kind of medicine is silent and won't cause any problems for a short period of time. However, this is also the danger of this medicine. If your Highness uses this jade fan to fan yourself every day, after a long time, the fragrance of the sickness powder will enter your Highness' body and cause your Highness to unknowingly fall ill. This illness will cause your Highness' body to become weak, powerless, and pale. Even the imperial physicians in the palace are helpless. Over time, her ladyship will lose her color and lose her life in this serious illness. Shin Yueji was slightly shocked. Jiyu Yuyin could not wait to get rid of her now. This was really a good method. If she really used this jade fan, she would fall sick and pass away like she wanted. No one would be able to trace it back to her. Jiyu Yuyin is in the palace, how can she be connected to the Jianghu? Suddenly, she thought of the third young master of the Jiyu family who had entered the palace. It was him. Apart from this person, Shin Yueji couldn't think of a second person who could silently send the Jianghu's sickness and joy to Jiyu Yuyin. This Jiyu Yuyin is really vicious and shameless. Your ladyship has helped her so many times, yet she still wants to harm your ladyship. This Jiyu family is really double happiness. Shin Yueji glanced at her and gestured for her to enter the inner hall. Thinking of the emperor lying inside, Shuangshi curled her lips. Her face was full of dissatisfaction, but her voice was still low. This should be heard by the emperor. Let the emperor take a good look at how the Jiyu family treats their benefactor so viciously. Shin Yueji smiled. So what if I know? Do you think he would punish Jiyu Yuyin if he knew? When she said this, she suddenly smiled. Compared to this consort, the emperor has to deal with official affairs every day. This consort feels that he is more suitable to use this jade shaking fan than this consort. Hearing the meaning behind her words, Shuangshi was shocked. Your Highness, are you trying to murder the emperor? Seeing the expression on her face, Shin Yueji frowned. Didn't you say that if it is discovered in time, it will be fine? The emperor is a dragon, so he will be fine in just a few days. But your Highness, Shuangshi couldn't ignore the ambiguous marks on Shin Yueji's neck. She secretly sighed in her heart. This woman's heart was really unfathomable. Just a moment ago, her ladyship was in deep trouble with the emperor, but as soon as she got out of bed, she turned her back on him. Chapter 202. Feng Zhouqing was awakened by a slight breeze. A familiar fragrance entered his nose. His handsome eyebrows furrowed, and the next moment, he opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was Shen Yueji's smiling face, holding a fan in front of him. The breeze blew across his jade-like face. The emerald fan looked a little familiar to him. He was stunned for a moment, and said, "Emerald fan?" He lifted the brocade quilt and sat up, rubbing the space between his eyebrows. "So your Majesty still recognizes this emerald fan? While your Majesty was asleep, older sister Empress came once, saying that she was here to thank this concubine. She also gave this concubine many gifts. Your Majesty, look, older sister Empress even gave this concubine this jade fan. I heard that this emerald fan is a treasure given by the envoy of another country, and your Majesty gave it to Empress. I didn't expect Sister Empress to be so generous to give it to me." Feng Zhouqing looked at her, and there seemed to be something else in his gentle eyes. But after a while, he looked away, and said tentatively, "When I was asleep, did I talk in my sleep?" Shen Yueji blinked, and suddenly, her pretty face suddenly blushed. Seeing her blushing pretty face, Feng Zhouqing's dark eyes overflowed with a layer of fierceness, but he quickly hid it quietly. Shen Yueji sat on the edge of the bed, holding the emerald fan, and said shyly, "When your Majesty was asleep, you didn't talk in your sleep, but when I was covering your Majesty with the quilt, your Majesty suddenly took my hand." There was a strange look in his dark eyes. Feng Zhouqing looked at her face, which seemed to want to say something. Although he was in a deep sleep, he was still conscious. That familiar fragrance swirled around him, that familiar touch, that familiar taste. He reached out his hand, and when he was about to touch the woman's neck, she seemed to be frightened and jumped away. She looked at him with a frightened face. "Your Majesty." Her jumping away made the emperor unhappy. "Come here. What are you doing?" Shen Yueji looked at him with a sad face, but she didn't go over. Even when Feng Zhouqing was about to lash out at her, she did not know where she found the courage to not go. "Your Majesty is such a bully. When you were asleep, you almost tainted this concubine's innocence. Now that you're awake, do you want to taint this concubine again?" She covered her red face and complained angrily. 2 black lines appeared on the man's fair forehead. "Imperial Consort, have you forgotten your own identity?" "I didn't forget." Shen Yueji looked back at him fiercely, "But the emperor doesn't like this concubine." Without giving her a chance to speak, Shen Yueji felt a strong force forcing her to walk towards the edge of the bed. She was getting closer and closer to the man, and she was shocked. The man reached out and pulled her into his embrace. Suddenly, the world spun around her. Her body softened in the man's embrace as he brought her to the bed and pressed her under his body. The collar in front of the neck was gently picked up by the man with his hand. The dense kiss marks on it numbed the man's eyes. His eyes fell on the ambiguous marks, and he didn't come to his senses for a long time. The emotions that flashed across his handsome face were too complicated. There was entanglement, pain, and regret. He actually lost control of her. He always thought that it was a dream. In the dream, her figure appeared countless times. In the dream, he lost control of himself and tangled with her. He held her in his arms and poured out his love and longing for her. She leaned into his arms obediently, her face full of shyness. Chapter 203. Every time, the naked and irrepressible love in his dreams would be empty when he woke up. There was no one beside him except for him. He didn't expect that he would lose control over Shen Yueji. Even when he was with Jiyu Yuyin, she would put some drugs in the incense to make him delirious in order to get him. Sometimes, he would fall into a trance and expose the things that he longed for the most. Sometimes, he would see Jiyu Yuin's face match with Jiyu Yuqin's. But at the same time, he would always come back to his senses. Jiyu Yuqin was Jiyu Yuqin. There was only one in this world and no one could replace her. But, when he thought that he had the same dream again, he didn't separate Shen Yueji and Jiyu Yuqin, but treated her as her. Thinking of this, his head started to hurt violently again. Shen Yueji saw him like this and slipped out of his arms. She stood up and tidied up her messy clothes. "Your Majesty, what's wrong? Can I get the imperial physician to take a look?" The woman's worried words made Feng Joqing slowly come back to his senses. He raised his head and looked at the face that was completely unfamiliar to Jiu Yuqin. He suddenly closed his eyes. It's okay. It's okay. Shen Yueji looked away embarrassedly. After all, with my beauty, it's normal for your majesty to lose control. There was a long silence. Shen Yueji covered her mouth awkwardly. That, your majesty, I'm just talking nonsense. Please don't take it seriously. Feng Joqing lifted his eyes to look at her and suddenly smiled. This woman was pretty and eloquent. She had a pair of sparkling eyes that were like crystal grapes. She had a delicate face, an exquisite cherry mouth, and a slender figure. Every part of her was a demon in the mortal world. Even Jiu Yuyin couldn't compare to such a woman. Any normal man in this world would be bewitched by her if they saw her. But Feng Joqing's eyes gradually dimmed. But she was the daughter of a general. He touched the position of his heart. Your Majesty. He smiled slightly. The beauty of an imperial concubine can easily make people lose control. His words caused Shen Yueji's face, which had just regained its rosy color, to turn red again. She embarrassedly covered her face and stomped her feet. Your Majesty, this concubine has ordered Shuangxi to prepare dinner for you. It's getting late, you should quickly eat. After you finish eating, you can return to the imperial study to deal with official business. Feng Joqing nodded. Seeing this, Shen Yueji retreated first. As he watched her leave, he stroked his brows with his long fingers and rubbed them gently. When he opened his eyes again, the gentleness in the man's eyes was like a sharp blade, and his handsome face was fierce and cold. In a trance, he seemed to see that familiar pale face looking back at him from not far away. The young emperor's eyes were locked on her and he did not blink. He reached out to her and watched the woman's disappointed and tearful face slowly disappear into the distance. Feng Joqing's gentle lips curled into an arc as the longing in his eyes faded away. When he stood up again, his posture was strong and his figure was tall and straight. There was no trace of his previous weak and pale appearance. The young emperor stood with his hands behind his back and his fingertips gently twirled. His deep eyes were full of shrewd calculations. Compared to you, the daughter of the Shen family is much smarter. Chapter 204. When Feng Joqing came out of the inner hall, he saw Shen Yueji's small figure busy helping him prepare the food. He frowned and walked towards her. Let Gao Dezhong handle these things. Shen Yueji looked back and smiled. What are you talking about, Your Majesty? It's rare for Your Majesty to have a meal here, so of course I have to serve Your Majesty personally. She knew that men didn't like sweet food, so she mixed sweet and salty dishes together so that men wouldn't get too sweet. Perhaps the man still had matters to deal with, so he left after eating a few mouthfuls of food. Shen Yueji respectfully saw him off. When his dragon carriage disappeared at the end of the corner of Fengqi Palace, she let out a sigh of relief. Shuangxi was busy preparing the food for her. Your Highness, why did you suddenly sigh? Shen Yueji dismissed the servants of Fengqi Palace and looked at him. Tomorrow, the emperor will take me out of the palace. That's a good thing. Shuangxi was stunned and then smiled. The emperor is really good to Your Highness. He doesn't forget to take you out of the palace. Shen Yueji shook her head. You're wrong. The emperor doesn't forget to take me out of the palace. He sends me back to the general's mansion first and then leaves. Moreover, Feng Joqing's kindness was somewhat fake. Perhaps when they were alone, she was a little lost in it. But after calming down, she knew that this had always been his way of doing things. Is that so? Shuangxi's eyes flickered a few times. Your Highness, the emperor is the ruler of a country. If there is something outside the palace that needs his attention, he can send someone to deal with it. Why does he have to personally? How would I know? It's not appropriate for me to ask him. But why does he have to take Your Highness with him? He probably doesn't feel comfortable leaving me alone in the palace. If Jiu Yuyin does something to me, I won't be able to deal with it. Seeing the mischievous smile on Shuangxi's face, her eyes deliberately flashed and she hurriedly said, Don't think too much in that little head of yours. The reason why the emperor treats Ben Gong so well is because of father. Thinking of Shun He, Shen Yueji sighed in her heart. Sometimes, She really envied herself for having a family that loved and cared for her so much. Just for the sake of the general. She winked at her, and his gaze fell on the kiss mark on her neck. She blushed and quickly pulled up her collar. She scolded in a low voice, "Girl, why are you getting more and more out of line?" She curled her lips disapprovingly. "Your Highness, what do you take this servant for?" "This servant is worried about your Highness. The Prince Regent will be here soon." "If the Prince Regent sees the hickey on your neck," Shin Yueji was shocked by Shuangshi's words. She subconsciously pulled up her collar. "I would have forgotten if you hadn't mentioned it." Mo Wushang was extremely petty on this matter. If he were to see the kiss marks left by Feng Joching on his neck, her hand subconsciously touched her neck. The reason she came to the palace was to become Feng Joching's favored concubine and seek revenge on him. She had lost her virginity in her previous life, so she was already his wife. Therefore, she did not think that she needed to keep her chastity until the end. She had never imagined that there would be another Mo Wushang in her world, and that she would continue to have contact with him. What does it have to do with him? She pursed her lips and said coldly, "I am His Majesty's woman. It's only a matter of time before I sleep with him. The Prince Regent and I are just on a whim." Even so, she stood up and said, "Order someone to prepare water for me. I want to take a bath." "Your Highness, you haven't eaten much." Chapter 205. In the warm bathing pool. Shun Yueji immersed herself in the water. The clear water was half submerged in her neck, and the clean, warm water was sprinkled with petals. The hot air mixed with the rich fragrance of flowers, clouding her vision. She stretched out her boneless fingers, gently pinched a petal, and brought it to her nose to smell. Vaguely, she seemed to recall something. After Feng Joching came back from the palace, he was not in a good mood, and his gentle face showed a rare tiredness. When she saw this, she was very distressed. When he was bathing, she came in to massage his shoulders. At that time, she had a selfish motive. She wanted to do not only to help him relax his muscles and bones, she also wanted him to tell her personally, to tell her about his tiredness, and what kind of trouble was bothering him. She was his wife, his only wife. He was her man, an indomitable man. When her hands landed on his smooth and muscular shoulders, she blushed unnaturally at the silky smooth skin of his. And the man, as if he did not expect her to suddenly come in, when he saw it was her, he smiled slightly, and the tiredness on his face seemed to disappear at that moment. He closed his eyes, and softly and affectionately called her, "Qin." She considerately massaged his shoulders, and shyly responded. After being married for so many years, he slept on the same bed with her, but he had never touched her. Most of the time, he hugged her to sleep together. Two warm bodies hugged together. They were wearing thin clothes, but he was like Liu Xiaohui. Over the years, he never crossed the line. She also thought that she was not good enough, and the man did not like her, so he did not touch her. But when she saw that there was no lack of beautiful maidservants to seduce him, and he turned a blind eye, and the maidservant was beaten, she knew that she was thinking too much. She thought that for him, it might be that he did not care about these affairs. His gentleness made her sink, and she thought that this was good. At least she could stay by his side, accompany him. But Feng Joching was not really like that Liu Xiaohui. After all, she was a woman, and was already of marriageable age. When it came to love, it did not mean that she did not want to. She wanted to bear children for him, wanted to let herself belong to him, because she loved him. Therefore, she wanted to give everything she had to him without reservation. Occasionally, when he hugged her, he would kiss her passionately. He would kiss her, her hair, her lips, and he would kiss her passionately. Every time, at the last hurdle, he would always restrain himself. Even that shower was, her soft hands caressed the man's smooth back, feeling the stiffness of the man's body. She didn't seem to notice. She asked him with a sorrowful tone, "Am I not good enough? Why don't you want to touch me?" She remembered that she had said a lot, but she didn't know what it was that had triggered the flood that had been suppressed in the man's heart for many years. He suddenly grabbed her hand and pulled her into the bath from the edge of the pool, holding her tightly in his arms. He kissed her passionately. His hands wandered all over her wet body, climbing up her softness, kissing her lips, devouring and nibbling. Her clothes were in a mess, and a large part of her snow-white skin was exposed in front of the man. She could clearly feel the man's arousal. And the symbol beneath him. Chapter 206. The man's kiss was rough and passionate, which was completely different from his usual gentleness. She could feel the man's big hand moving to her leg and slowly moving up. She blushed and bit her lips, not daring to open her mouth. She was afraid of making a shameful sound. She wanted to hug him back and kiss him. But Feng Zhouqing didn't give her the chance. He had been taking the initiative. And then, Xin Yueji rubbed her eyebrows. Maybe it was the temperature in the pool that made her imagination run wild, and she remembered some of the past with Feng Zhouqing. Later, when she woke up, she was already on the bed. Her wet clothes were taken off by the man, and her naked body was held in the man's arms. Some parts of her body that were kissed by him were painful, and there was also some discomfort in her lower body. She blushed and got into the man's arms. The man kissed her gently and whispered in her ear, "Don't think too much. I'm just afraid that you can't bear it. Go to sleep." She blushed shyly, buried her little face in the man's warm chest, and fell into a deep sleep. With what happened that day, the knot in her heart was untied. Although the man still rarely touched her like this, she was already satisfied. Every once in a while, Feng Zhouqing would be with her, and every time at a critical moment, she would faint, but her body gave her the feeling that he had touched her. She was just complaining that she was so useless that she could faint in this matter. And then, she became pregnant. In the past, thinking about these things, Xin Yueji narrowed her eyes and couldn't help but wonder if all this had been planned by Feng Zhouqing from the beginning. Bang! Water splashed everywhere, and the warm water hit her face, making it wet. Xin Yueji came back to her senses in an instant. She looked at the man who suddenly appeared in front of her. His white and smooth chest was exposed in front of her, and even the moment he went into the water, she clearly saw his naked body. And his lower body. She was so shocked that she couldn't speak. Instinctively, she hurriedly covered her body down. But damn it, she couldn't move. She stared at the uninvited guest in front of her. The handsome and cold face, the white and tender skin, appeared in the water, and the thin waist. His broad chest didn't have any excess flesh. Mo Wushang's black pupils landed on the kiss mark on her neck, and a cold light flickered in his obsidian eyes. He reached out and pulled the similarly naked woman into his arms. His large palm caressed her snow-white neck, using water to wash the kiss marks on it over and over again. You bastard, get out of here." After a long time, Xin Yueji finally found her voice. Her angry voice was hoarse because of her anger. She looked coldly at the cold-faced man who was wantonly moving around her body. Mo Wushang pretended not to hear her. He saw that the kiss mark on her neck had not faded even after washing it several times. Instead, it was her delicate neck that had turned red. His cold face became even more gloomy and cold. He leaned over and buried his face in her neck. It was a shameful murmur. Xin Yueji was angry and annoyed. She felt the man's wet and hot lips invading her neck, licking and biting it over and over again. From the beginning until now, he had not said a word, as if he was a ruler, endlessly violating her. Guards! Guards! She was trembling with anger and shouted for help. The next moment, her lips were kissed by the man. It was a punishment, and it was a spite. Chapter 207. Xin Yueji couldn't move. Her mouth was blocked by him, so she couldn't speak. His lips invaded the beauty between her lips and teeth. Everything that belonged to her mouth was swept away. Xin Yueji was ashamed and angry. An inexplicable anger spread from her mouth. Her eyes were almost spitting fire. Apart from fire, there was also deep hatred. He was forcing her. He was forcing her again. It was him. If it wasn't for him, she wouldn't have been misunderstood by Feng Zhouqing. How could there be so many shameful acts? How could she go from the empress of Feng country, who was above all others, to a bitch that everyone hated and sneered at? He was the initiator. He kept saying that he loved her. He kept saying that he could give up everything for her. But in the end, he kept forcing her. Didn't he say that he loved her? Why did he turn around and leave when she needed him the most? He didn't listen to her cries, didn't see her helplessness. Why didn't he want her to lie on the bed alone, suffering the sneers and cold looks of those people in despair? Her gaze gradually became sorrowful. She was feeling sorry for herself. Why did she change her attitude towards him because of Jichu's words? He was the regent of Feng country. He could do whatever he wanted or didn't want. All he needed was a word and a look. He treated her well because she was obedient. When he was angry, he could also plunder and violate her wantonly. Why would he care about her feelings? People like them. Shen Yueji's heart chilled. In an instant, her body was cold like frost. The coldness that emanated from the bottom of her heart caused her pitch-black eyes to lose all light. When the man left her lips, she curled her lips and suddenly smiled. If the regent wants to see my body, I'm afraid you won't be able to. After all, this virgin body has to be given to His Majesty first. Then, it will be your turn, the regent. Her sarcastic words made the man's body suddenly stiffen. He looked at her with his dark eyes. She looked straight at him. Her eyes were full of indifference and hatred towards him. You still believe in him? He has always been hypocritical to you. He's just using you. In this world, only I treat you sincerely. Only I will never betray you. You've suffered once, do you want to suffer a second time? Feeling the man's arms around her waist tighten, she felt a burst of pain, but she didn't frown. So what? Aren't you all the same? First, you gave this consort a candy to eat, and now you're forcing this consort. Is hitting acupoints very fun? Or did the regent like to force people? Destroy a person? Did you treat the late empress like this? There was a ball of fire in her chest. Feng Jiuqing's gentleness and affection were so real that she had no choice but to believe it. What he did today, even at that moment, made her firmly believe that he had feelings for her. There was no need for him to remind her. How much love could a person who could even take out her own child with her bare hands have? She knew, but so what? She was willing to play along with him. She wanted to personally let him taste the feeling of being deceived, betrayed, and hurt. The man's slender fingers brushed over her chest. In the next instant, he felt that his body could move again. Shen Yueji raised her hand and unceremoniously slapped the man's face. The strength of this slap was so strong that the handsome side of the man's face turned red and blood seeped out. She smiled coldly. Does the regent only know how to force people? You really make it sound nice. The so-called dignity, the so-called power, how much have you put down? In the end, aren't you still using your identity to suppress me? Forcing me? She picked up her clothes from the edge of the pool. Regardless of whether the man's gaze was on her body, she put on her clothes and left. Her thin clothes, coupled with a gust of cold wind from outside, made her feel cold. But the chill in her heart was far greater than the cold air she was feeling now. Shen Yueji suddenly felt that she was quite ridiculous. She had already experienced a betrayal. That heart-wrenching betrayal, for her, was like a nightmare. Chapter 208. She believed in his subordinate's lies and felt that he had something he couldn't say. She felt that he was a man who could be trusted. She sat on the bed for an unknown amount of time. Her body temperature slowly returned to normal. She heard a noise coming from outside. She didn't look up. She didn't know where she was looking at. The corners of her eyes were blurry and there were hot tears welling up in her eyes. She forced herself not to shed tears. Until the man came closer and the familiar aura was some distance away from her. She heard a noise. When she looked up, she saw that he was kneeling 3 steps away from her. The man was tall and his aura was as sharp as a heavenly venerable. His expression and posture made him look like an otherworldly Rakshasa. There was no extra expression on his handsome face. His dark eyes were locked on her. The two of them looked at each other for a long time. Then, she saw his cold thin lips slowly spit out 3 words. I was wrong. It was different from the previous time when he said that he was wrong. He was teasing her. This time, she could feel that when he said those 3 words, he was careful and cautious. There were also some cautious probing, fear and uneasiness, helplessness and worry. All kinds of emotions seemed to be intertwined. What shocked Shin Yueji wasn't that he apologized, but that he was kneeling to her. No one knew better than her how arrogant Mo Wushang was. When facing Feng Joqing, he didn't lower his arrogant and noble head. When facing the strong enemies of other countries, he didn't look at them straight in the eyes. It was such a man who didn't kneel to the ground or the sky. He was so noble, but he actually lowered himself to kneel to her. The annoyance and hatred in her heart suddenly dissipated at this moment. If it was any other man, perhaps Shin Yueji's heart wouldn't change so quickly. But it was Mo Wushang. No one knew his dignity and nobility better than she did. He would rather die than lower his head. But even so, thinking of his brutality and coercion just now, Shin Yueji forced herself to look away from him. She didn't speak, so the man continued to kneel. She didn't know how long it had been. The man's dark eyes kept falling on her. He knelt straight and his legs didn't move at all. He just knelt on the ground and looked at her. His heart was like a tumbling wave. Shin Yueji suppressed the discomfort in her heart. She didn't want to be stared at by him all the time. She simply lifted the brocade quilt, turned over and got on the bed, burying her head firmly in it. Even so, the man's gaze was still like a nail, staring at her from behind. No matter how tightly she buried herself, she could not ignore his intense gaze. The two of them were in a stalemate, and gradually, it was late at night. Time passed slowly and stiffly. During this stalemate, Shin Yueji roughly knew that he had been kneeling for no less than 4 hours. There were no lamps in the pitch-black hall. She could only rely on the man's persistent gaze to know that he was still kneeling. She buried her whole body in the brocade quilt and poked her head out. She looked at the dark beams and said, "You can go." The man did not respond. "Do you think I want you to kneel down?" Chapter 209. Mo Wushang, don't you hate me? Since you hate me, why are you pestering me? I've already entered the palace. I just want to be the emperor's woman wholeheartedly. I don't want to think about anything else. The former empress died because of you. Do you want me to repeat the same mistake and end up like the former empress? Shin Yueji said a lot. In the end, she didn't even know what she was talking about. She twitched her lips and laughed self-deprecatingly. The high and mighty Prince Regent actually knelt down to me. What kind of reputation would I have if word got out? Do you really think that I'll be happy if you do this? Seeing that the man was still kneeling there, neither expressing his stance nor leaving, she lifted the brocade quilt and buried her head again, ignoring him. Let him kneel for as long as he wanted. She was a woman who didn't know what was good for her. She didn't believe that he could continue kneeling after she fell asleep. The sky was dusky. A little light penetrated the darkness. Perhaps it was because she was hiding something in her heart. Shin Yueji didn't wake up as usual this time. The moment she woke up, she turned to look behind her. She saw that the man was still kneeling straight, a pair of dark eyes falling on her body, not moving away at all. The faint light shone on his handsome and cold face. Half of his face still had traces of being hit by her last night. Did he really kneel for the whole night? At this moment, Shin Yueji couldn't tell what she was feeling. If Mo Wushang had knelt for a while on a whim, then this night, she slept for the whole night, and he knelt motionlessly for the whole night. Thinking of this, the flames and anger that had accumulated in her heart because of him, for some unknown reason, had suddenly and inexplicably dissipated. She stared at the man for a long time. The moment her eyes met his, there seemed to be a glimmer of joy in his dark and gloomy eyes. When she looked away, the man's eyes dimmed again. She wasn't the kind of person who didn't know what was good for her. Mo Wushang had indeed gone overboard last night, but he also realized his mistake and knelt here for the whole night. It was precisely because she knew his character and identity. Shin Yueji moved her lips, lifted the quilt, and got down from the bed. She walked up to him in 2 steps and was still 1 step away from him. She looked into his eyes and seemed to be looking down on him. "Why?" The man was no longer silent this time. His sharp lips moved a few times, and a hoarse voice slowly flowed out from his lips. There was determination in his hoarse voice. "My feelings for you are real." Looking at Shin Yueji's pretty little face, he spoke again. "It has never changed, and it wasn't on a whim. Then last night, Shin Yueji swallowed the rest of her words angrily. I'm jealous. The man's 4 simple words made Shin Yueji pause. Thinking back to last night when his gaze fell on her neck, it was dark and cold with a murderous glint. From the moment he started taking liberties with her, his gaze never left her neck. His kiss was like a sharp blade, kissing and licking her neck over and over again. Chapter 210. She closed her eyes and turned her back. You can get up. Forgive me. These words made Shin Yueji laugh. Forgive you for what? We're just using each other. What's there to forgive? You can use me, but I've never used you. The man's words made Shin Yueji's heart calm. She said lightly, so what? The man was silent again. To Shin Yueji, this kind of silence was undoubtedly saying, yes, even if it's like this, so what? Seeing that the man still didn't move, she couldn't help bending down to help him up from the ground. After kneeling for an entire night, his legs, which were made of iron, had become numb. Seeing him leaning towards her, Shin Yueji didn't push him away. She just said, don't force me like this in the future. Well. Shin Yueji helped him sit on the edge of the bed. Seeing the bruises on his face, she wanted to apply some medicine to him. The man seemed to be afraid that she would leave. As soon as he saw that she was going to leave, he immediately hugged her tightly in his arms. Forgive me. I won't force you again in the future. He put his chin on her head, and his tone was careful and deliberate. Shin Yueji was moved by his cautious appearance. Shin Yueji wanted to pull his hand down, but the man held it tightly. She let the man hold her for a long time before saying, the emperor said he would take me out of the palace today. The man's body tensed. She took the opportunity to break the man's hand. I haven't been back to the general's mansion for a long time. This time I'm going back to see my father and mother. Don't make trouble. I'll go back with you. With me? Shin Yueji frowned. I'm in the same carriage with the emperor. How can you go back with me? I still say that, don't make trouble. Forget what happened last night. If you dare to mess around again, don't blame me for not giving you a chance. Her words made the man's dark eyes light up. He hugged her tighter and buried his head in her neck. What? Her voice was annoyed. At the thought of forgiving him so easily, even her tone was indignant. I don't want to see you with him. She knew that he was uncomfortable, but Shin Yueji didn't expect him to say it so bluntly. She was silent for a moment. The man hugged her tightly, and his voice was hoarse and sullen. I feel terrible seeing you smile at him. How bad is it? Following his words, Shin Yueji continued. Mo Wushang looked into her eyes seriously. I want to kill someone. She was shocked and quickly looked away. What's the use of saying this now? In the past, when I liked you, you ignored me. Now that I have entered the palace, you say that you have me in your heart. Are all men the same? You don't know how to cherish what you can easily get, and you treat what you can't get as a treasure. The man was silent and sulking. Shin Yueji grinned. He didn't know if she was trying to provoke him or what. Did you forget what you promised me? Don't force me. Feng Jiuqing is the emperor. If he wants to do anything to me, it's not something I can refuse. The hand around her waist suddenly tightened. I won't let him touch you. His tone was sharp and murderous. Overnight, he had returned to being the high and mighty regent that everyone feared. Chapter 211. Her lips were sealed by the man again. It was not because of the man's overbearing threat last night. His kiss was extremely gentle, gently nibbling on her lips, as if he was kissing a rare treasure. Shin Yueji thought she would be angry, but damn it, she did not have the slightest bit of anger. Mo Wushang kissed her carefully, not feeling her resistance. His heart was aroused with deep joy, and he gently clasped her waist, deepening the lingering kiss. Your Highness, the Emperor ordered eunuch Gao to pass a message to you. The voice stopped abruptly again. Double happiness blinked, looking at the two people on the bed who were reluctant to part with each other. Blinking, blinking, blinking. Last night it was the Emperor, today it was the Prince Regent. At this moment, there was no longer any fear in her heart. There was only one thought. Your Highness has been facing two men for a day and a night. Can you bear it? Fortunately, double happiness was quick-witted enough. Without waiting for the two people on the bed to come back to their senses, he rushed out as if he had never been there. When Shen Yueji had a chance to catch her breath in Mo Wushang's arms, she looked back, but there was no sign of double happiness in the hall. She even thought that she was hallucinating. Buried in the man's arms, Shen Yueji panted heavily. You've crossed the line. In the future, you are not allowed to kiss me unless I say so. Mo Wushang's straight nose rubbed against her snow-white and sweet neck. Shen Yueji couldn't help but twitch her mouth at his shamelessness. She pulled his head out of her neck and glared at him. Did you hear that? Mo Wushang's lips curled up, and he kissed her pink little face again. I can't control myself. Shen Yueji, she was used to hearing Mo Wushang's words of love, so she felt that she was immune to it. But this sudden words of love made her feel that she had been counterattacked by him. It seemed to be saying that he couldn't control himself to kiss her, so how could he be obedient? Shen Yueji's little face turned red, and she didn't dare to look at him. If one were to say that Feng Zhouqing's kiss made her feel disgusted and embarrassed, then Mo Wushang's kiss was different from Feng Zhouqing's. Mo Wushang's kiss really made her blush. Feng Zhouqing's kiss was something she rejected. Mo Wushang's kiss caused her to sink into oblivion. She didn't want to admit it, but if it wasn't for Mo Wushang, she would have long thought of ways to make Feng Zhouqing pay attention to her and flip her card. She would use her body and methods to make him fall for her. But ever since Mo Wushang appeared, she no longer wanted to use such methods. Whenever Feng Zhouqing was flirting with her, she would deliberately avoid him. When she saw Feng Zhouqing acting like Jiu Yuqin because of her, she returned to being Shen Yueji in order to prevent him from paying too much attention to her. She subconsciously clenched her fists. This wasn't a good sign. She and Mo Wushang were just using each other. No matter what kind of difficulties he had to deal with her, this time, she couldn't have too much contact with him. Other than using him, she shouldn't have any other thoughts. Thinking of this, she pushed the man away. Just now, double happiness came over. It should be eunuch Gao sent by the emperor to pass a message, asking me to pack my things and set off. Prince Regent, I may not be in the palace for a few days. You can go back to your Prince Regent's mansion and deal with the affairs of your mansion in these few days. Chapter 212. Seeing her coming out of the inner hall, Shuangxi kept looking inside. After looking around for a long time, Shen Yueji became impatient and patted her head. What are you doing? Shuangxi covered her head aggrievedly. Your Highness, you're too bold. If I hadn't dutifully kept watch outside for you, what if someone who's not afraid of death broke in and saw your Highness and the Prince Regent? She couldn't help but tease her. Don't think too much. It's not what you see. Shuangxi curled her lips disapprovingly and chuckled. Don't worry, your Highness. I'm the most loyal to you. When I return to the General's mansion, I won't tell Madam and the General about it. Hearing this, Shen Yueji's face darkened completely. You still want to tell them? Realizing what she had said, Shuangxi quickly covered her mouth and swore. No, your Highness, don't get me wrong. I didn't mean that. I've prepared breakfast for you. It'll be ready soon. Your Highness, I'll go get some water to help you wash up. While Shen Yueji was wiping her face, she saw the man coming out with messy clothes. When she saw Shuangxi's expression, her mouth twitched. She didn't have time to speak. Your Highness, I've only got a basin of water for washing your hands and face. After you wash your face, you can use it. Hearing this, Mo Wushang nodded his head and looked back at her with an appreciative gaze. All right. Because he had knelt for an entire night, if one did not look closely, his posture when he walked out was no different from normal. However, Shuangxi was a busybody. She had been staring at him, so naturally, she saw the man's movements. She secretly patted her head. The regent must have been in one posture for too long, so his walking posture was a little strange. Alas, why didn't he change his posture with Her Highness? For example, Her Highness sitting on top. Shen Yueji took a sip of tea absent-mindedly. When she saw Shuangxi's wretched expression, she suddenly coughed hard. Seeing this, Mo Wushang frowned and hurriedly walked in front of her, patting her back. Your Highness, Are you okay? Shuangxi, who did not know how sinful she was, looked at her worriedly. Shun Yueji rolled her eyes at her and said in annoyance, "When did His Majesty say we should depart?" "Oh. His Majesty said that he would come to Nyangnyang's place after morning court." After morning court? Shun Yueji was shocked and instinctively pushed the man behind her away. She looked out of the hall. The sky was about to brighten, and it wasn't too late for Feng Joqing to arrive. She was just about to say something to chase Mo Wushang away. "Don't worry, your ladyship. After the morning court session, His Majesty still has to make a trip to the imperial study. He has to give some instructions on some matters that he won't be in court for the next few days. I reckon that by the time he really arrives, the sun will already be high in the sky." Shun Yueji let out a long breath and glanced at Shuangxi. She complained, "Can't you just say everything in one go? I didn't prepare a lot of things, just a few sets of clothes." "Yes, Your Highness." Shuangxi responded respectfully, then turned around and went into the inner hall to prepare. In the blink of an eye, only she and Mo Wushang were left in the huge phoenix perch palace. In the quiet air, it was so quiet that even the drop of a needle could be heard clearly. She could feel the man's gaze on her, and she couldn't ignore it. Chapter 213. I'm not in a hurry. Mo Wushang found a seat close to her and sat down. He naturally reached out to take the teacup she had just drunk and took a sip. He turned a blind eye to her cold gaze. "What if you don't leave and the emperor suddenly comes back and sees you?" The man's hand holding the teacup paused, and his cold handsome face was as indifferent as a block of ice. "Are you so afraid of being seen by him?" "Of course. It's good to have an affair with a man, but I'm his woman in name now. I don't want the Shen family to be implicated because of my bad reputation. Have you thought about where to go during the few days you return to the mansion? You don't have to worry about things after returning to the mansion, do you? I haven't seen father and mother for several months. I'll stay in the mansion for a few more days and talk with them." "Where else can I go?" The man frowned for a long time. "Aren't you going to go somewhere else?" The man's words made Shun Yueji unhappy. "That's my own business. What does it have to do with you?" A bad feeling arose spontaneously. Looking at the man's handsome and peerless facial features, she suppressed the bad feeling in her heart. "Do you still drink tea, Regent?" Looking down at the empty teacup, Mo Wushang shook his head. Taking the teacup from his hand, Shun Yueji glared at him. "If you don't drink tea, leave quickly." The man didn't move. Shun Yueji gritted her teeth. Mo Wushang stared at her for a while, looking delicate and pitiful. "I haven't eaten yet." "Shun Yueji, the Prince Regent's mansion is not far from the Imperial Palace. If the Prince Regent feels hungry, why don't you go back to your Prince Regent's mansion directly? The ladies in your mansion may already be waiting for you to come in person." Shun Yueji's words made Mo Wushang feel dissatisfied. "There are no women in my mansion." "Who are you kidding?" Shun Yueji sneered. "Not long ago, I heard from a servant in the palace that a minister in the court had given you no less than 10 stunning beauties. Not only did the regent not refuse, but he also took all of them into his pocket." Hearing this, Mo Wushang's pitch-black eyes suddenly revealed a faint smile. He pulled Shun Yueji's fair hand and pulled her into his arms. He bit her ear and said, "I gave them all to Feng Juqing." Shun Yueji. Startled, she stood up from his body. "What did you say?" Indeed, Feng Joqing didn't refuse anything that came to him. No matter if he liked it or hated it, so long as it was a gift from others, he would accept it all. The man looked at her seriously. "In my house, only you are the hostess." The man's words of love made Shun Yueji a little bit tempted, but her current focus was not on this, but the 10 beauties sent into the palace by him. "Do you know that the more beauties there are in the harem, the harder it is for me to fight for favor?" The man didn't think much of it. "You don't need to fight for favor. You just need to spoil me." Shun Yueji gritted her teeth and swallowed. Only then did she realize that if this man was thick-skinned, she really couldn't deal with him. She picked up a pastry and stuffed it into his mouth. The man obediently opened his mouth and gently licked her fingers that were about to reach back. It was itchy and numb. Chapter 214. Regardless of whether he could eat it or not, she stuffed the pastries on the plate into the man's mouth one by one. If he couldn't eat it, he would spit it out. After spitting it out, Mo Wushang continued to take the pastries she stuffed into his mouth. Shen Yueji glanced at him speechlessly. What a scheming trick. After a few rounds, Shen Yueji was like a deflated ball and admitted defeat. Regent, it's getting late. You should go back quickly. I have to take a bath and freshen up later. I'll be with you. The word together reminded her of the man's tyranny last night. Shen Yueji blushed, turned away, and gritted her teeth. Get lost. A pair of big hands encircled her from behind and whispered, what? Shen Yueji answered impatiently. Kiss me. Not getting a response from her, Mo Wushang pestered her tirelessly. His voice was hoarse with a hint of expectation. Kiss me and I'll leave. You said that. After calming down for a long time, Shen Yueji gritted her teeth. She didn't know how many times she had been kissed by him. However, if kissing him could really make this eyesore go away, it would not be a loss for her. Yes. After receiving his response, Shen Yueji turned around and stared at his pitilessly handsome face for a while. She let out a long sigh, leaned over, and kissed him on his fair cheek. The man didn't move, but frowned unhappily. I want to kiss you. Shen Yueji put on a fake smile and repeatedly comforted herself in her heart. Bear with it for a while. So, she tiptoed again and kissed the man's sexy thin lips. Just as she was about to leave, her waist was locked by the man. Even the back of her head was inserted into her hair bun by the man's 5 fingers, deepening the lingering and ambiguous kiss that was full of the breath of the couple. The tip of his tongue slid in nimbly, rolling the fragrance and sweetness in her mouth. Shen Yueji didn't dare to move and let the man kiss her. The kiss was passionate and passionate. She was gradually out of breath from the kiss, but she was like a fool, trapped in the man's arms until the man's hand was disobedient on her waist and slowly moved up. The touch on her chest made her shiver, and she abruptly came back to her senses and pushed the man away. She wiped her mouth and pointed in the direction of the Phoenix Perch Palace's main hall's exit. Keep your word and get lost. Mo Wushang looked deeply at her and then at the exit of the hall. His dark eyes were wrapped in a layer of smile. Then a gust of cold wind in the black brocade robe brushes her face. Shen Yueji's vision darkens, but the man's heavy wet kiss falls on her face. Before she left, the man's words echoed in her ears. When I come to find I never enter through the main hall. I always enter through the window. Shuang she came out with a pile of packed parcels in her arms. Your Highness, I suddenly realized, Shen Yueji was in the middle of cleaning her mouth. When she heard what she said, she subconsciously swallowed the water in her mouth with a gulp. Her face darkened. Realized what? Your Highness's clothes in the mansion can occupy half of the General's mansion. These clothes are custom-made for you by General's wife and young master. There are countless clothes. Your Highness doesn't need to bring clothes back at all. Chapter 215. Isn't it bad to let others talk? She calmly took a bite of the pastry and said, Oh, I understand. His Majesty has arrived. The sudden report made Shen Yueji almost choke on the pastry. She was shocked and quickly patted her back. Your Highness, are you okay? Don't worry, the Regent has left, the Emperor won't find anything. Greetings, Your Majesty. Shen Yueji didn't dare to look at the white robe entering the hall. She obediently bowed her head and saluted. Feng Zhouqing walked in front of her. Seeing her submissive appearance, he reached out to help her. Your Highness, why have you become so obedient today? Shen Yueji chewed the pastry in her mouth that she hadn't swallowed yet. After swallowing it, she slowly said, Your Highness has always been very obedient. The man looked at her with a faint smile and walked to the round chair on the side and sat down. Shen Yueji dared to look up at him. Dressed in an elegant white robe, his black hair was simply tied up, and the hair behind him was like a waterfall. He looked like a playboy. Compared to Feng Zhouqing, who didn't wear the dragon robe, Shen Yueji found that she still liked him in white. The man was like jade, and the gentleman was unparalleled in the world. It probably described people like him. She quickly stepped forward and poured a cup of tea for the man and handed it to him. "Your Majesty, have you had breakfast?" Feng Joqing took the tea she handed and shook his head. "I came to you after ordering some trivial matters in the court. It just so happens that I haven't had breakfast. Why don't you stay here and have breakfast before you set off? Ask your maid to prepare some food for me to eat on the road." The man's gentle and concise words had already indirectly refused her and said that he would stay for breakfast. Shen Yueji's stomach was full of anger. If she didn't eat and continued to ride in the carriage, she would die. She gave Shuangxi a look. Shuangxi immediately stepped forward and wrapped all the pastries on the tea table with a small handkerchief. She just wanted to say, "Your Majesty, I'm ready and can go." However, when she looked up, she saw the man staring at her in a daze. Shen Yueji looked back. "Emperor, is there something on this concubine's face?" Feng Joqing smiled and pulled her over. At the sight of the man's large hand on the ends of her hair, Shen Yueji was so scared that she hurriedly bent down so that the man could reach her head. "It's just leaving the palace. There's no need for imperial consort to bring along the complicated etiquette of the palace." The gold hairpin and jade on her head, no matter which one it was, were extremely heavy. The man took off the jewelry for her one by one, and her black hair was tied up into a simple bun by the man himself. Shen Yueji looked at the familiar hairstyle in the bronze mirror in front of her. His pitch-black eyes narrowed. Because they were patrolling incognito, even the carriage was simple. Sitting in the carriage, the man focused on the book in his hand. As for Shen Yueji, she was sleeping soundly in the carriage. She sat in the same carriage with the man. The carriage was not big, but the decoration inside was extremely elegant. As the carriage bumped from time to time, she would lean closer to the man. Chapter 216. She just stared at the man like this, half asleep and half awake, then fell into a deep sleep. The subtle sound of snoring made the man finally willing to look away from the book. He glanced at her clean and sweet sleeping posture. Feng Joqing smiled slightly and reached out to put her little head on his shoulder. When his fingers touched her smooth and tender skin, it was like an electric shock. His eyes became dim and he suddenly withdrew his hand. At the same time, in Xianghe Palace Bang, the entire auspicious Harmony Palace was thrown into chaos. The ground was littered with broken tea utensils and precious jewelry. Jiyu Yuerin's little face was ferocious. Because of anger, her chest was heaving up and down. That was not all. She flipped over the coffee table in front of her. Her slender little hands were also cut by a sharp weapon, and blood dripped down drop by drop. She was completely unaware of it, and only knew that she would smash and kick whatever she saw in her sight. Her eyes were red and swollen. It seemed that she had been crying for a long time. The hatred in her eyes burst out like an awl. Nanny Jiyu knelt on the ground, not daring to breathe. Seeing that she had smashed most of the things, she also vented most of her anger. Then she got up from the ground and bandaged the wound on her hand. There were quite a number of sharp weapons stuck in her palm, and she carefully picked out the debris inside. "Your Highness, why did you do this?" The Emperor suddenly left the palace. "He must have something important to do. I guess he didn't have time to tell you." "Didn't have time?" Jiyu Yuyin smiled faintly and her eyes were full of hatred. Since he didn't have time, why did he take Shen Yueji out of the palace? "If it weren't for the informants in the palace, I wouldn't have known that they had left the palace. Nanny Jiyu." She gritted her teeth and her eyes were scarlet. "Wasn't what I did good enough? Ask yourself, what else does he want me to do? I listened to him in everything and did everything for him. In front of father and mother, I said good things about him. My Jiyu family was loyal. Even the throne was benefited by my Jiyu family at that time, but my father, mother, and brothers still did their best to assist him. For him, I worked hard to be the queen of the harem. For him, I saw many women being sent to the palace, and I had to live in harmony with them. I helped him take care of the 6 palaces because I was afraid that those women would cause trouble and distract him." She clenched her fists tightly, blood gushing out from her palms once again. "If I say that I can't compare to that woman, now, I can't even compare to Shen Yueji. What's so good about that woman? He even brought her out of the palace. He stayed at her place every night, giving all of his favoritism to her. Why? Ji Yuyin didn't understand. No one, no woman in this world, would be willing to see the man she loved dote on another woman. In the past, she could be gentle and decent, but that was because she knew, in this harem, no woman could enter his eyes. But the appearance of Shen Yueji made her completely flustered. His every move, his protection and indulgence. It was as if she saw a second Ji Yuqin. The emperor was hers. The emperor could only be hers. Your Highness, please don't be angry. Perhaps it's because of the injury on your face. His Majesty originally planned to take you out of the palace, but in order to let you recuperate in the palace, another hard object came crashing down. Immediately, Nanny Gu's words stopped abruptly. She felt a pain in her head, and a bloody hole instantly appeared. Chapter 217. She didn't dare to move. She knelt on the ground in fear and didn't dare to speak again. I don't want to endure it anymore. I've endured it for so many years. I didn't endure it when I entered the palace. Now that I'm in the palace, I'm still enduring it. Could it be that all of you want me to watch Shen Yueji become my second formidable opponent with my own eyes? How many tricks have I used to get rid of Ji Yuqin? If Shen Yueji becomes important in his heart again, how can I get rid of her? Granny Ji Yu, you have to remember that she's not Ji Yuqin. She's a member of the Shen family. The Shen family has the same status as the Ji Yu family. It's not as easy to get rid of her as it is for Ji Yuqin. Do you understand? Granny Ji Yu moved her lips but didn't dare to say anything. Ji Yuyin smiled coldly. Out of the palace? Well, I'll make sure that she won't be able to return. Does the emperor think that she's safe in the Shen family? I'll let him see with his own eyes whether it's dangerous inside the palace or outside the palace. Shen Yueji didn't know how long she had slept. She suddenly felt upset and opened her eyes. She rubbed her eyes and subconsciously thought of Ji Yuyin. Ji Yuyin must have known that Feng Zhouqing took her out of the palace. According to her character, after hearing this news, she would definitely go crazy and think of all ways to deal with her. She knew that in her heart, Feng Zhouqing had already taken root and she wouldn't allow anyone to covet her. Feng Zhouqing's subconscious favoritism made her believe that she couldn't even put on the simplest fake act. Thinking of this, Shen Yueji couldn't help chuckling. Compared with the people of the Ji Yu family, Ji Yuyin was too well protected. She couldn't hide even the slightest bit of her thoughts and her well-behaved appearance was full of flaws. How could such a woman live so arrogant until now without the Ji Yu family's support? But the previous her seemed to be even more stupid. She couldn't even see through Ji Yuin's simplest act. You're awake. The man's gentle voice rang in her ears. Shen Yueji glanced at him and realized that she and Feng Zhouqing were so close. And when she woke up just now, her head seemed to be on his shoulder. Thinking of this, she hurriedly moved to her side and said, Your Majesty. After leaving the palace, you can't call me Your Majesty anymore. Ah! Shen Yueji blinked her eyes in confusion. He patted her head with the book in his hand. Madam. Shen Yueji paused again. Madam. Is this how the common people call me? The man looked at her with a hint of a smile on his lips. His dark eyes were like bright stars in the night sky. Hubby. Feng Zhouqing chuckled softly. The word husband coming out of Imperial Consort's mouth seems very unfamiliar. Shen Yueji smiled awkwardly. It's also the first time I've called you that, Your Highness. On the night of the wedding, inside the red radish tent, her veil was lifted. The man was dressed in wedding clothes, and his outstanding appearance was set off by the wedding clothes, like a painting. His eyes were smiling and his lips were gentle. He stood on the edge of the bed and looked straight at her. His lips parted as he spoke in a gentle voice with a smile on his face. Prince is what others call this king. Since Madam is married to this king, you should call this king husband. She shyly agreed and timidly called him husband, only to see the smile in his eyes deepen. His gaze was as gentle as a pool of soft water as he looked deeply at her. Chapter 218. Shen Yueji gave a wry smile, dispelling the memories of the past from her mind. She lifted the curtain and looked outside. In the past, she was too immersed in Feng Joqing's gentleness and couldn't extricate herself. She knew that he was good at putting on a gentle and approachable appearance and doing despicable things. But this time, she didn't want to be immersed in it anymore. People who had died once would not die a second time. Especially after leaving the palace, the bustling streets were both familiar and strange at the same time. It reminded her of her own shadow in the past. Feng Joqing was a person who knew how to use his strengths. He never trusted anyone, even his closest confidant. He was full of schemes. These days in the palace, she had been with him day and night. While they were playing, his gentle appearance would sometimes make her feel absent-minded. She gazed at the street stalls outside. Speaking of which, many years had passed since the year she married Feng Joqing. The familiar street stalls and the old rundown house were places she often visited. The kind old lady gave her a piece of sweet potato because she felt sorry for her. They were all gone, time continued to flow, and it would not stop for anyone. Shen Yueji put down the curtain, not wanting to see the lively scene outside. "Is there something on your mind, Imperial Consort?" The man's eyes were not on her, but he was asking her. Shen Yueji turned to look at him. "I remember that when I was a child, I often came here with my eldest brother to play. At that time, there were many familiar old women and old men. Now I find that they are all gone, and the former stalls have been occupied by others." The woman's words made the man's hand holding the book tighten. After a long time, he smiled warmly. "Imperial Consort, do you think that things are the same, but people have changed?" "You can't think so. Maybe they are old, and their children don't want them to go out and run around at such an age. They should be at home to enjoy their old age. But it's still thanks to the emperor." "Oh." The man laughed and looked at her gently, as if he wanted to know what she would say. Shen Yueji smiled and said, "In the past, before the emperor was the emperor, there were many riots in the Feng nation. Civil officials suppressed and bribed people. The people in the capital were robbed and fought over things. The people complained to the heavens. In a small place, there were starving corpses all over the ground. The previous emperor was addicted to beauty and spoiled the treacherous officials, causing the Feng nation to fall into chaos for a short period of time and almost lose the nation. However, after the emperor ascended the throne, everything took a turn for the better. The emperor loved the people like they were his own children. He punished the treacherous officials and recruited skilled craftsmen again. There was no lack of knowledgeable and accomplished people in the Feng country. They were all placed in an important position by the emperor. The people once again returned to their peaceful and happy lives. The envoys from other countries also did not dare to invade again. At this point, Shen Yueji couldn't tell what she was feeling. Feng Joqing was an emperor. Even she couldn't deny that he was a good emperor, a very, very good emperor. He loved the people as if they were his own children, and he treated the people as his priority. It was said that he loved power and the country, but in fact, everything he loved was related to the people. Everything he did was for the people. The country was his, and the power was his, but he never squandered it. Whether it was beauties, decorations, food, or necessities, he was still the same as before. However, he wasn't a good husband. He wasn't a man who was worthy of her trust. In his heart, the millions of people in the Feng nation were countless innocent lives. In his heart, she was just a woman who was not essential. Including their unborn child, he could plot against his own flesh and blood for the country, for power, and for the people. Shen Yueji's eyes were cold. She didn't want him to see the hatred in her eyes, so she lifted the curtain again and looked outside. Chapter 219. She knew that no matter who would get the Feng kingdom in the end, no one could be like Feng Joqing, who loved and cared about the people as if they were his own life. The next moment, her hand was held in the man's palm. His big palm was very warm. It wrapped around her as if it could sweep away all obstacles for her like before. No matter if she was wronged or not, this hand could always give her endless love and love. "Imperial concubine, you seem to have a very high opinion of me." The man's words confused Shen Yueji. She turned back to look at him. Shin Yueji understood what he was referring to. Yes, no matter how well Feng Zhouqing did, he only obtained the throne because he rebelled. No matter how much he contributed and sacrificed for the Feng nation, once there was a stain on him, he would never be able to get rid of it in this life. I'm not the only one who thinks this way. Even the officials in the court and the citizens of Feng nation think that you're a good emperor. Hearing this, the man chuckled softly. His lips curled up as if he was mocking himself. Yes, I am a good emperor, but not a good husband. This sentence touched the softest part of Shin Yueji's heart. She calmly took her hand out of the man's palm. You are a man. You should build your career. Love is just a burden. It is a good thing that your majesty can distinguish the importance of it. Was it a good thing? Feng Zhouqing's lips twitched into a smile. The person who sat on the throne was destined to be lonely. His hand tightened subconsciously. The atmosphere in the carriage became silent again. Neither of them said anything to break the silence. Until Shuangxi's voice came from outside. Miss, we have arrived at the general's mansion. Shin Yueji was stunned. She subconsciously looked at the man beside her. The man opened his eyes but did not say anything. She lifted the hem of her dress. Before getting off the carriage, she turned back to look at Feng Zhouqing. Your Majesty, I will visit the general's mansion in person after I deal with my personal affairs. Did he mean that he would not go back with her? Shin Yueji nodded and got off the carriage. The moment the curtain of the carriage was lowered, she could not help but look back. She saw a gentle and handsome face behind the curtain. Your Majesty. Hearing that, Feng Zhouqing looked at her. You have to be careful alone. Hearing this, the man smiled and nodded. Don't worry, Jin will come back safely to bring imperial concubine back to the palace. After she got off the carriage, she saw that the carriage didn't stay in front of her for long and just swaggered away. Shuangxi looked at her absent-minded expression. Niang, are you reluctant to part with the emperor? Shin Yueji chuckled. Why do you say that? When her ladyship looked at his majesty just now, the reluctance in her eyes made it seem like she wanted to leave with his majesty. Double Happiness answered honestly. Shin Yueji just narrowed her eyes and said nothing. Your Highness, look, the great general and madam have both come out. Following Double Happiness's words, he saw a row of people standing at the entrance. Standing in front of them was Shun, his face, which was filled with tears but did not lose its toughness despite his old age. Shun Qiu was also constantly wiping her tears as she looked at her with tearful eyes. Chapter 220. You old thing, be gentle, be gentle. Don't strangle our daughter. Shun Qiu stepped forward and pulled Shun his hand away. She carefully held Shin Yueji in her arms. Mother's pitiful daughter, you must have lost a lot of weight after entering the palace. Look at your whole body, you're just bones and you can't even see any meat. Shin Yueji was held by Shun He and Shun Qiu as they entered the residence. When the servants at the entrance of the residence saw her return, they all bowed respectfully. Welcome young miss back to the residence. Without the title of imperial concubine, she returned to the general's mansion as if she was still the arrogant and despotic miss of the general's mansion. The scene in front of her made Shin Yueji's heart sour. Whether it was Shun He or Shun Qiu, everyone in the general's mansion lived in harmony and treated Shin Yueji with sincerity. If they knew that the Shin Yueji standing in front of them was no longer the miss of the general's mansion, what would they think? She gently smiled. Father, mother, everything is fine in the palace. You don't have to worry about me. Hearing her words, Shin his eyes widened and was about to explode. Shin Qiu couldn't help but pat her. Your daughter has been travel-worn all the way back. Hurry up and let your daughter into the house. What if she gets cold outside? Hearing this, Shin He quickly pulled her hand into the room. Look at father's memory. Your mother is right. Jia just came back. If you have anything to say, let's go into the house first. Let's talk inside. It was said that a daughter and her mother would never stop chatting. After entering the house, Shun He personally went to the kitchen and asked the people to prepare her favorite food. He watched from the side and checked with his own eyes. Shin Qiu, on the other hand, held her hand as tears streamed down her face. Jia, Do you know that your father and mother's hearts were almost broken during the few days you were in the palace? Especially your father, when he heard that the daughter of the Gu family had caused trouble in the inner palace to frame you, he almost rushed into the palace and brought you home regardless of the consequences. Shin Yueji held her hand back. Mother, you think of your daughter as too weak. Since I dared to enter the palace, I naturally have a way to deal with the Gu family's daughter. Be that as it may. Shun Qiu couldn't help but shed tears. Mother isn't afraid of the other women in the palace. After all, with our status, those people wouldn't dare to offend you. But Gu Yuyin is different. The Gu family's platform is too big. Mother is afraid that you'll be at a disadvantage. Jia, why did you have to go to the palace for no reason? There are so many rules in the palace. You can do whatever you want in the mansion. If you get into big trouble, father and mother will take care of it for you. Shin Yueji clenched her fists. The words that were at the tip of her tongue didn't come out. She was now Shin Yueji, not Gu Yuqin. The real Shin Yueji had already died on the day she was drowned in the lake. Shin Furen did not know that this daughter was not that daughter, so how would she know that she was eager to enter the palace? Shin Yueji forced a smile and said, Mother, can't you see that the emperor still cares about me? Even when he left the palace to handle some matters, for my safety, he sent me back to the general Fu to be protected by father and mother. From this, it can be seen that in the emperor's heart, I still have some weight. Looking at the inner palace, I'm afraid that even the empress does not have this kind of treatment. Chapter 221. In Shin Qiu's heart, she had never been optimistic about Feng Jiuqing. There was nothing in the past because Shin Yueji didn't have any contact with him. But now, after Shin Yueji entered the palace, she was full of dissatisfaction when she mentioned his name. If it wasn't because he was the emperor, they couldn't offend their superiors as officials. Big brother hasn't come back yet. Shin Yueji didn't want to be entangled with her on this matter, so she changed the topic. Why mention him? It's not easy for us mother and daughter to see each other. Daughter, tell your mother what kind of grievances you've suffered in the palace. Don't let irrelevant people disturb us. Mother, Shin Yueji was shocked. Big brother is your son. He is not an irrelevant person. Humph. Shin Qiu sneered. In my eyes, I only have you as my precious daughter. I don't care about his useless son. Shin Yueji. Looking at Shin Qiu's face that was filled with expectation, Shin Yueji moved a little. She listened to her questions and her answers with shame. In the back kitchen sob. General, I missed you so much, sob. After getting off the carriage, there were many people and Shuang she didn't dare to be too obvious. After her mother was taken away by the madam, she followed Shun He alone and chased him to the back kitchen. As soon as they met, she immediately rushed over and hugged the man's thigh, crying out of breath. Shun He's old face was moved. He helped her up from the ground and patted her shoulder solemnly. Shuang Shi, I know it's hard for you to follow Ji into the palace. You did a good job. Don't worry, I won't treat you badly. Shuang Shi sobbed and wiped her tears. General, I've been in the palace for only a short month, but I've already been beaten 3 times. Boo-hoo. Hearing the grievance in her voice, Shun He glared at her. Who beat you? Shuang Shi talked about all the people who beat her, adding oil and vinegar to the story. This Jiu Wei and Zhongsun family. Shun He gritted his teeth. Don't feel wronged. I will go to the palace tomorrow. I will definitely find trouble with them and help you vent your anger. Double happiness smiled through his tears. Thank you, General. He suddenly realized that he had to be careful everywhere he went in the palace. He had to observe his surroundings when he spoke to see if anyone was eavesdropping. There were so many rules he had to learn. Shuang Shi sighed worriedly. The mansion was still the best. She couldn't help but miss the time when she was with Miss in the manor. There weren't so many rules. The general and madam treated her like their own daughter. In the general's mansion, she could follow Miss and eldest young master to do all kinds of evil things, but once she entered the palace, General, why do you think the young lady suddenly decided to enter the palace? Hearing this, Shun His face was full of heartache. Sigh, at the end of the day, Ji is doing this for the sake of our Shun family. It's really been hard on her. After saying that, he immediately turned around and ordered the kitchen, put 2 more drumsticks in Jia's bowl later. Look at how thin you've become after entering the palace for more than a month. Hearing this, the kitchen lady nodded respectfully. Don't worry, General. I've already put in 3 drumsticks for Miss Double Happiness. Come here. Shunhe pulled Shuangxi to a big tree not far away and looked at her with a serious expression. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.